so fun to have you back. I was trying to remember when you were on the podcast last, and I should be able to actually look that up, but it's been a couple years. So I'm so glad to have you back and so excited to catch up.
I am so thrilled to catch up, Jenny. We go so far back with our coaching days and then got to touch base with the podcast several years ago. I feel like we just catch up on podcasts now, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I was going to say, that's our excuse to actually catch up with each other is, hey, let's record a podcast. It'll be great.
And it's great because then everyone gets to benefit from hearing what life updates we have.
That's right. That's right. Well, for those that maybe haven't caught the podcast that happened a couple of years ago, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you, what you do, give us a little picture of your world.
Yeah. So I am the CEO of Jet Set World Travel. It is a travel agency that I founded 10 years ago. Actually, it was originally called Epperly Travel. Yeah. So founder and CEO of this company that has evolved in so many new and beautiful ways over the past 4 years that have actually been our industry's most challenging, right? Having a travel agency in a pandemic is not the best recipe for success.
Right.
So, but we managed to turn it into ours. So, I reference we and ours a lot because my husband is my business partner. He is our
Awesome.
COO. So that's an interesting dynamic that people are always very kind of like to be voyeuristic into, how do you do that and stay married?
How does that happen? Yeah.
And I'm a mom of two. I've got 2 little girls, 1 and 4 years old. And, the whole idea of balance is definitely a myth, but I think that seasons are really important to lean into as we look at entrepreneurship and creativity and motherhood and all of those things and how they go hand in hand.
It's so fun to hear you share your story and where you are, because I think when you and I connected, it was before you and Jeremy were even married.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been.
Yeah. Right. So I remember you guys getting married. Then there was a discussion of him becoming a part of the business. And now you guys are partners. And now you've had a couple of girls. It's so fun to just have been somebody kind of on the sidelines, a part of the journey here and there, and just see all the amazing things that have happened in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, you were more than just on the sidelines, because I remember when he and I were making this decision to work together, which was, we were still engaged at the time, right? So we had a marriage impending.
Wedding going on. Yes. The whole thing.
Lost a key employee. And he was like, what if I applied for the job? And I was like, absolutely not. That could destroy our relationship. This business currently owns me. I don't want it to own you too. And I remember, Jenny, that I think I was actually actively coaching with you at the time, I called you for advice, but I think I was actively coaching. And I don't remember what your advice was at the time, other than probably I don't know about that. But you were a helpful sounding board for me as I made this major life transition.
Yeah, it was a big, it's funny because it's fuzzy now, going back into the details, right? But I just remember it was a big deal. But I think what was so good about it, and maybe we'll just go there right now in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think what was so good about it is that you were really evaluating, I think a lot of times people bring family members, whether it's spouse or friend or sister or whatever, bring people in that they know so well and are so close to without really thinking through, is this the right fit? How will we do when we work together? And I remember that part, that you and Jeremy actually had some really thoughtful conversations around that position and what you specifically needed and whether that fit his gifts, because he was leaving his career. So you want to speak to that a little bit? Because I think you guys were actually really intentional to go, this doesn't just sound good. Let's make sure this is good.
Yes. Thank you for noticing that and appreciating that. And I will tell you that even as intentional as we were, it didn't lessen the number of bumps along the way to get it to a good working relationship, right?
Sure.
But the things we were most intentional about and what eventually led me to change my mind from absolutely not to, you know what, let's give it a try, was we had this vision for our family of freedom and flexibility.
Yeah.
And he at the time was working as a financial analyst for Merrill Lynch. And while he had a great job and he had a decent amount of flexibility, ultimately he's still working for a corporation. And
Right.
I am running a business myself. I'm absolutely drowning at the time. And so it was in tandem, a thoughtful conversation about what we wanted and imagined for our family as we were building it out.
That's so good.
And what skill sets we could bring to say, if he was the same thing as me, then it would be redundant and I would have remained drowning in the business now with just someone else who could do the same thing.
Right.
But he brought such a unique set of skills. I am everything to right brain as Jeremy is to left brain. So together we make one whole brain. And it was very helpful in the business because he could see just from the outside looking in, he's very book smart too. He's got like his
Mm-hmm.
MBA. I don't have any of those things. I am like pure hustle and street smart.
Right.
And so he was able to look at the business and say, actually, I see some areas where we could like shore up some systems and processes. And I was like, that sounds so painful and boring.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there was just like a lot of low hanging fruit where he could come in and bring amazing insight into the things that I never would have paid attention to because I was just constantly chasing like the next dangling carrot.
Right.
And always thinking about what vision am I casting and what goal are we going after? And, just the things that I excel at.
Yeah.
So given all of that, and now of course, hindsight is 2020, as intentional as we are, it still was a learning process that the home version of one another is very different than the work version.
That's
and
good.
Even though home Lindsey and Jeremy are madly in love and have deep respect for each other, work Lindsey and Jeremy were a bit office nemesis for a little while to be able to actually work together well, And so it was a learning experience to say, wow, I respect you from a professional level because of the skills that you're bringing to the table, not simply because you're agreeing with me, which is kind of what I wanted to begin with, was just someone that said, obviously you've done it this way, you should keep doing it. You're doing great. But it was learning how to healthfully disagree and respect each other.
That's so good. I love how you notice like work Lindsey and Jeremy and home Lindsey and Jeremy. So how do you guys create the boundaries? Because you are business partners, how do you create the boundaries between home and work, and when you're on and when you're off? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say we're fairly good about not, talking about work at the dinner table, especially with two young children. We really want to be present. So presence is one of our family values. It's to be present, it's to be playful, and it's to know that we always have choice. So we're constantly going back to our family values and making sure that work is not infiltrating in those things. But just little things that we've come to do that are super helpful. Here, I'll tell you a couple. These are such a glimpse into our funny little relationship. But one is that we no longer interrupt each other's days because it's so easy. We both work from home that we could just be walking through the room that someone's working in and just launch into like hey, I need you to do this, or it just completely disrupts the flow. Yep. And so we developed what we call dings. Like when you go to wait at a deli or something and you have to like ring the little ding bell. And so,
yep.
So he'll walk through the kitchen if I'm working out at the kitchen and be like, I have a ding for you whenever you have a moment. I have 2 dings. So we developed our ding system. And then also what is very helpful is we have a standing weekly coffee date where we parking lot the larger ideas that would take longer amounts of time, right? So that way if that's a ding, the ding's like a 5-minute or less type of activity. And the coffee date is for when we have a 30-minute, we've got to talk this through, really get our thinking hats on and solve this problem together. Yeah,
I love that. And, and I think even if maybe some of our listeners don't actually work in the same job with their spouse, if they're working from home, and that's the reality for a lot of people now, is like, it's easy to just do those interruptions that are kind of normal in a family cadence. But I love what you guys have kind of established. And my husband and I kind of have a similar dynamic of like, our offices are sacred space. It's like we really try to think about each other as if we were coworkers, in an office, another office environment where you wouldn't feel as quick to just go interrupt your coworker without like just a check-in or like, hey, I have a quick question for you. When would be a good time? Because sometimes with our spouses, we're a little more just, we just expect them to just be able to jump in. But in a work context, it's like we actually need that respectful rhythm of the work that we're doing. And so I love some of those. Those are great suggestions.
Really interesting way of looking at that too. I've only ever thought of it as couples that work together, which is a very small portion of the population, but so many, to your point, are in the same space these days. And even if you travel and work together, but you're not actually actively working in the same job, just being able to go back to that idea of professional respect. It's something that I don't think we naturally assume simply because we're married.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think we just treat it differently. And in some ways it's like, it's kind of helpful to go, okay, there's like, I like you said earlier, work Lindsey and Jeremy and home Lindsey and Jeremy, and just the distinction of that. So that was fun. That was totally a rabbit trail, but I apprecied your insights on it because it's super. I mean, again, I think it just makes us think about some of our work behaviors a little differently.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. Did you always know you were a leader, or are you a bit of a reluctant leader? Like, how do you think about leadership and what that's looked like for you?
That's a good question. So I'll tell you that I always knew I was an entrepreneur. And so in that way, maybe I did always feel the leadership tendrils kind of, reaching into me, but it took me a while to separate those two things and to really step into what it meant to be a good leader. So I would say I've not been reluctant on any of it. I'm a pretty independent, headstrong individual. I was raised I am an only child, but I was raised by parents who just kind of instilled in me, like, you can do whatever you set your mind to. And my dad was an entrepreneur. And so I just always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. So in that way, there's like a level of independence, but that doesn't mean you're a good leader, right? Or that you're an intentional leader or that you even want to lead people.
Right.
And I think the reluctant part for me was when I started really scaling this business, and JetSet has grown in the past 4 years. We've more than quadrupled. We went into the pandemic a team of 10. Now we've got over 90 team members. We scaled by acquisition. We scaled by organic growth. Like this company, we landed on the Inc. 5000 list last year. This company has just grown beyond my wildest dreams, which means my leadership abilities have had to be very intentional, right? Like the company I'm running today is not the same thing I was leading
That's so
4
good.
years ago, that felt much more of a solopreneur venture that just had happened to build out into a team.
Yeah.
Now it's a living, breathing organization, and that needs a leader that is capable. So it really took the pandemic, kind of leveling the business and me looking around at my industry and seeing what others were doing and going, oh, I have an opportunity here. I have an opportunity to step up as a leader because I know I've got this ingrained in me. I do think it is a God-given gift. And so what would that look like? And so many of our decisions in growing the company, and Jeremy's the same way, have been because we're stepping into that leadership role that we feel like, hey, we're uniquely equipped to do this. And so that's really benefited us.
That's fascinating. I love how you identified going from a team of 10 to a team of 90 that's a totally different ballgame. So tell us a little bit about some of the shifts you had to make. What were the things you had to do differently and like very intentionally go, I can't operate the same way. Like a new version of me has to emerge. I'd love to hear some insights around that.
Yeah. So a few different things. Let me just start with the fact that almost every time that I've recognized that a new leader or a new version of me has to emerge, it is almost always a direct result of burnout. And so for that reason, I've started very much looking at burnout, not simply as a symptom of overwork, but as a sign of evolution. And there are the times that I fight it, right? Where I think like, I'm just tired. Maybe I need to get a little bit more off my plate, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately it comes down to, I probably need to get this entire task that is burning me out off of my plate and to someone else who it gives life to, so that I can then step into the next version of what this company needs of me. And so that has been a huge leadership opportunity and kind of like where those milestones were.
That's a completely different framing of burnout than I've ever heard before, but it makes so much sense. So like, can you give us an example of what was something that was burning you out and you're like, okay, I love that. It's a sign of evolution.
Yeah.
Give us a little more on that.
I also know like burnout is an actual medical condition. Like this is identified by the World Health Organization. I actually, for my podcast, just interviewed Kate Donovan, who runs a podcast called Fried. And it's all about burning out.
Yes, I've listened to a few of those episodes. Yeah.
I might have to connect you to. I think you would get along. But it's an actual condition. And so if someone has this, I don't want to belittle it and say like, it's just your mindset. There's so much you have to do to get through it.
That's fair.
I did those things as well, but I also recognized, so, to your question of like what actually was going on, a couple of those milestones have been, one, I went from solopreneur to, now managing a team, and I was the lead practitioner and the lead salesperson for many, many years. So I own a travel agency. I was the lead travel advisor, and I was absolutely burning out of client work. I just was not, it was like what I recognized in burnout is the lack of resilience. And it was like my skin was just getting thinner with each client interaction, even the good interactions.
Right.
And I just felt like a human punching bag. And so when you start feeling that to me was a sign of something's got to change here. And so that was then when I stepped out of the client work and into a leadership role. So this was, probably 6-7 years ago. And then even in that leadership role, I was oftentimes working directly with our advisors who are also clients because we have a B2B element. Yep. And I started feeling the same way, after a couple of years of mentorship and realizing, gosh, I think it's time that I scale to another level again. And then we appointed a managing director who now is the mentor. And now I'm able to really sit in more of a vision casting role, which has allowed us to grow in a different way.
Brilliant.
And so those were the moments that were really important to me to realize time to up level my leadership abilities. Yeah. And I think it's so important to recognize too, and Shannon Miles, who introduced us, taught me this, that if your company is is doing what it should, then it's growing. And if it's growing, then every day you're running an organization that's a little bit bigger than the day before that you have never done before. And so you have to start recognizing your cap as a leader and what do we do to pour into ourselves to be able to actually humbly grow this thing and not just think, oh, I've got everything I need to be able to run this organization of 90 people. Like that. Lindsey from 4 years ago could not have done that. And so we had to be very intentional about what kind of mentorship we get and who we surround ourselves with and how Jeremy and I both are growing as leaders through that.
Yeah, that's so smart. So smart. Was it challenging to let go of some of those things? Because that's what you knew, right? Like you knew how to be the one, doing those things, whether it's mentoring the other, I'm sorry, what did you call them?
Yeah, the team members, the agents, the advisors. Yeah.
Agents. That's the word that I was trying to come look for. But yeah, that's the stuff you knew how to do. And then all of a sudden you're releasing that, even though it's burning you out. So talk about was it coaches and mentors that kind of helped walk you through that? Was it you and Jeremy? What did that look like?
It was a combination of both of those things plus the leveling of the business. So I was absolutely president of Control Freaks Anonymous here. I was the bottleneck that was always keeping my business from growing. And I remember Shannon specifically telling me, the tighter you cling, the slower you'll grow. Shannon's just full of these amazing insights.
I know, right?
And I remember hearing that, but it was before the pandemic had leveled the business. And I thought, oh, that's good advice. I'll start loosening up a little bit and I'll learn to delegate. And I was doing it just inch by inch. Yeah. And I think God very much with the pandemic was no, we're actually going to completely let go of your death grip on this thing. You are going to be forced to, as you encounter business failure and motherhood and your own health issues and journey, you're going to actually be forced to learn to rely on a very well-equipped business partner that you've been given, as well as a very well-equipped team who's chomping at the bit to get to lead. So over the past few years, that has been my biggest learning lesson, is kind of letting go of that control. But look at the evidence, right? The business has catapulted because of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You see the results of it, but you couldn't have predicted that, right? As much as you would have hoped for it, that place of risking letting go of something that you need to release in order to go on to the next level of leadership is terrifying.
It is. And what's so crazy, and I wonder if some of your listeners have found themselves in this place, the decision to do that, I was almost willing to burn the whole thing down before I was willing to let someone else try their hand at it. And I remember the specific moment and why I say this.
I was gonna say, and were you thinking about it that way? Was it that a conscious thought? Yeah,
absolutely. That's how much I needed to control it, that I also needed to control its demise. So in the middle of the pandemic, when Jeremy and I, so we're all eggs in one basket, right? We're 5 months pregnant, pandemic hits, we have a home under contract that we have to choose to walk away from in order to keep the business. And so every day we're studying this spreadsheet that is titled Project Slim Fast. So how can we get, reduce it so we can keep our run rate and actually keep this business? And I remember there being a conversation early on where I was maybe this is just a sign because I'm burning out so badly and I've got this baby on the way and this is so much stress on my body. Maybe this is just a sign that I feel like I told him this word for word. I feel like I've been walking around with a match that is lit. And I'm just, listeners, I'm rolling this match between my fingers right now. I'm ready to flick it on the business and just watch it go up in flames. That was how burned out I was and how much I was I'm ready to just, and Jeremy goes, would you consider letting me have a go at it before you do that?
Before you just let it go up in flames. Can you give me a chance?
And this was when he was actually hey, can I be your business partner? He was working within the business. And even at that point, I had not allowed him to become a business partner because I was such a control freak. And so
he's my gosh.
Could you I'd love a go. And thank God he convinced me to do that because he, again, going back to that different skill set, he is equipped in a way that I am not, to let certain things roll off of him. And so the things that were really burning me out, he was I have a superpower of patience, of being able to move through this and lead through this. And so it was just such a beautiful example of partnership, both in marriage and in business, that you know, I've heard it said that marriage is not 50-50, it's 90-10, because when you're 90, the other's 10. And when he's 10, you know, vice versa, when you're 10, he's 90. And I just saw that so beautifully manifest in the way that we partnered together to not just keep this business, but absolutely grow it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is amazing. That's amazing. And I love your honesty, because I think there's so many listeners who can relate to that, right? Like, we probably haven't said that out loud, but we would be perfectly happy with just like walking away and letting it burn, you know, because when you're to that point, when you're just that tired and you're that burned out, like, sometimes you see no other way and you have trouble seeing the potential in somebody else being able to take it someplace you couldn't. Right. And absolutely. I think I so appreciate your vulnerability and just honesty about that nature of wanting to control something. And especially when we're either in the senior leadership seat, the founder seat, it's your baby. It's all that you know. And so it is hard to envision that somebody could do some element of it better than you can. And it's just such an important learning. So powerful.
One of the things that was most helpful to that note, just like a tangible tip for your listeners to take away if they're kind of in this position. One of the things that I had to learn within that delegation, you know, exercise, I was still micromanaging the what or the how. Sorry, let me rephrase this. So what I learned was to delegate the what and not the how. And what I mean by that, maybe this is common practice, I don't know, it took me 10 years of business to learn it, was that I would tell the team member what I wanted to see, and then I would tell them how exactly I wanted them to do it, because it was the way that I wanted it done. And that would keep them from actually being able to use their own brains and autonomous way of thinking and unique skill sets to get to the what. And so Jeremy actually taught me this, right? Like, delegate the what and then look away. Like, you can create some checks and balances, a system of accountability, but stop trying to micromanage the how. Yes. And learning that process is really what helped me kind of realize, like, no one's ever going to do it exactly the same way as me, but that is the point.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's such a helpful framing too. Cause I think I actually had something similar happen. This was back when I was leading a team, when I was working in Nashville. And I had 4 direct reports that worked for me. I was executive director of the organization, and we were stuck. Like, it was just one of those seasons where it's like nothing's working, and we kind of just had a like come to Jesus moment as a team. And I said, guys, okay, starting with me, what do I need to hear? What do I need to do differently? How do I need to lead differently? And they said, Jenny, tell us the what and why, and let us figure out the how. They were like, just let us figure out the how. We will figure it out. And they were like really amazing, competent individuals. Still, most of them are dear friends to this day. Yeah. But I didn't even realize I was over functioning. I was doing too much. I was trying to take care of it all. And I think sometimes it's well-intentioned, right? I think sometimes we think we're helping our team by, filling in all the gaps and not just releasing it to them, when in fact it's actually making them crazy. They're like, will you just let us do it?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And you just use that word over-functioning, which I think is such a common, groove that we fall into as leaders. And almost all of us are probably able to relate to being a high achiever, right? Like, if you're an entrepreneur or a founder or a senior executive like this, you do tend to go toward over-functioning, especially in times of high stress.
That's right.
And that's just something that is so helpful to learn about yourself and to learn the ways to not make it your team's burden now.
Yeah. Oh, that's really well said. Okay. Speaking of high achievers, you talk a little bit about how success and anxiety are linked for high achievers. Can you talk about that a little bit, about that dynamic of success and anxiety, and how we're juggling all of this?
I became really hyper fixated on this recently because I've reached a point in my life, personally and professionally, where I have been diagnosed with anxiety, right? Like, this is not just I'm anxious. I have had seasons of a major anxiety disorder, and they were at their height when I was at my kind of spread most thin within the business. And I think even at that time, I actually willingly embraced the anxiety, because I thought it's what was making me successful. Like, I actually thought, this is the reason, this is kind of my secret weapon, right? Because I constantly want more, and not enough is never enough. And if I don't achieve, then my heart will actually stop, because that's what's pushing it going. forward. And I always thought that was the reason I was successful. Like I thought that was my upward trajectory. And I do think for someone like myself, I had to learn the hard way that I had so closely linked my success with my self-worth. And so when the business was leveled in 2020, I had a big identity crisis around that of like, oh, it's failing, so I'm a failure, right? Like this is obviously it just makes sense. And really having to like work through that, which allowed me to then, as the business kind of came back around on this other side, we had the acquisition opportunity. We then were able to grow it organically. I was able to make choices this time around and say, okay, I'm not going to go back to that place of anxiety. I didn't have it anymore because I'd gotten far enough out of the business during maternity leave to say, well, what choices would I need to make to see if I could achieve and I could have ambition without that anxiousness pushing me forward. And I wondered, will that mean I won't get as far? Yeah, but at that point, it didn't matter anymore because I'm now a mom. I have different priorities. Let's just see. And so on this other side, I really do believe that it is possible for us to still maintain an ambitious spirit. And I think that's a God-given gift. I think that like we are high achievers for a reason. It's not something we should be ashamed of. And, but we don't need to wear our anxiety and our busyness like a badge of honor. And so that for me has been a huge learning lesson over the past few years. And I'm just always obsessed with asking other, people who have succeeded, like, do you think that it was because of your anxiety? Like, do you think that was necessary to get you there? It's just fascinating to hear people's take on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do it on the podcast all the time. Like every person I have on.
I
just a little voyeuristic with it.
Well, it is interesting because like as you were sharing that, I'm thinking, yeah, it is kind of a badge of honor, right? Like it is kind of, this just goes with the territory. Like if I really want to accomplish great things, then this is just part of it. This is just what comes with it. Like sometimes I'm giving myself that pep talk, right? Of like, you've just got to like suck it up. You can do it. You've done it before. Keep going. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
But I don't think I don't think we're meant to have to feel that all the time. Like yes, there are pros and cons with leadership. There are highs and lows, and you're going to feel a lot of those things much deeper because you have more of the risk riding on your shoulders.
Right.
But I don't know that it's necessary to just wear that in a way that takes away from our being able to be present and to live happily in our day-to-day, right? Like this is the same idea of, I run a travel agency and we talk about like the people that decide to wait until retirement to travel, right? Like it's like you're working so hard to get to that point at the end instead of like enjoying it in your daily life. And I feel that same way about building a business. Like it's not just about the end goal. I want to be able to enjoy my life getting there, especially as the parent of young children.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I think Lindsey, that's so, I know a lot of listeners, that's super inspiring to go, wait, like, because I think sometimes you just get stuck. And I love how you didn't choose the circumstances, you kind of found yourself in the circumstances that forced you to kind of come to grips with it. And in many ways, that probably was a gift that, I don't know if you would call it a gift, but from the outside looking in hindsight, it looks like a gift, right? Of that, like being forced to be pulled from that for a moment. And letting you like just really get perspective on it and go, actually, there is a different way. Like I don't have to live with this level of anxiety in order to still be successful. And so how would you coach the leaders listening who are feeling the tension of that? Like, what would you coach them to do to find that healthier balance if balance is even the right word, but a healthier path where anxiety is not driving us so much.
Totally. Without having to have their entire livelihood leveled and start over in 18 months. Yeah. I would much prefer it for you listeners to not have to go through that. The idea that I kind of touched on earlier about separating your sense of self-worth from your success, I think just our culture and anyone who's a high achiever, those things just feel very like tightly braided together. And so becoming more aware that your wins and losses in business are not reflective of you and your value and your worthiness as a human. Right. And like Jamie Kern-Lima has a book out right now, Worthy, that she just came out with that is so central to this idea. So I'd recommend it to everyone. That is just pivotal. And then another thing too, Jenny, you're just saying about like that season of life. And I look back now, I do agree it is a gift and it was a gift. Even at the time, it was so hard. But what I refer to that type of season as, and maybe this like can give some freedom to anyone who's in the thick of one of those seasons of just hardship and challenge. I call that the monster that saved me.
Hmm.
During that time of life, I was very, it just kind of like obsessed with the story of Jonah. And some of this is because Jonah was called to Nineveh and he was like, this is the one place I'm never going to go. And I was called back to my hometown, which was the one place I was never going to go. We had to uproot our family from our community, move back to my hometown in order to make ends meet. And I was just like, I feel like Jonah. And I feel like I'm now swallowed in the belly of the whale, and that was the monster, right? And you're going, where is this thing going to deliver me? Like, am I ever going to be able to get out of this? Right now, it just feels like, it's this gross, horrible, messy middle of a situation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that whale is what delivered Jonah to exactly where he was supposed to be and who he was supposed to be. And for me, I look at that as this is the monster that saved us.
Yeah.
It was really, really, really hard at the time. But ultimately, this company would not be who it is. Our family would not be who they are. I would not be the wife and mother and leader that I am had we not gone through that.
Wow. So powerful. Lindsey, this has been just really, just fun to catch up as a friend, but really powerful to hear just your journey and story over these last few years and just how much you've grown and both yourself and the business is just incredibly inspiring. Before you go, I want you to tell folks about your podcast. I love the title. Who made you the boss? I was like, yes. Are you the boss of me was what I wanted to say. And I was like, no, that's not right. Who made you the boss?
Yes.
So give us a quick overview of the podcast. Like why that title? What do you focus on? Where can we find it? Just give us a quick synopsis of the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. The title is so tongue in cheek because for many of us, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Jenny. I have a number of times, almost daily, where I look in the mirror and like I put my shirt on backwards, or I'm like having to go lead this company, and I'm like, like if anyone knew, right? And I ask myself that like inner critic comes out, and they ask the question of like, well, who made you the boss? Like that is exactly what I wanted people to feel when they heard that title and when they listened to the show. So it's all about like, let's tackle those like modern gremlins that get in our head, right? Like the imposter syndrome and the perfectionism and the obsession of control that's really just an illusion. Like, let's talk about that with other incredibly successful people and finally call those things out.
Yes.
Because it's such a lonely journey when you are in that leadership seat. And I oftentimes felt like people were not willing to just really lay it all out there. And so that's why I created Who Made You the Boss. You can find it on any podcast platform that you listen to, but it's conversations just like this, right? Where we're like honestly diving into the dark side of success and the risk to the reward and what that actually looks like.
That's so good. Yeah. Everybody needs to go check that out. Cause as soon as you launched it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. So great. You've had some amazing guests on the show. So make sure we'll put links in the show notes so everybody can go check it out. And then tell us a little more about Jet Set and where people can stay connected with you, learn about the agency and
all the things. Jet Set World Travel. If you're planning a trip anywhere around the globe, please feel free to contact our team. They are a team of travel advisors, which a lot of times people hear that and say, wait, do the travel agents still exist? They are busier and more advanced than ever because of this world that we're living in now, right? People need travel help more than ever.
Yeah, you need travel more than ever. And there's so many options. Like now you can kind of go do it. It's like you actually need somebody who knows what they're doing to make sure you don't book something you didn't intend.
Bingo. Yes. It is the expert that you never knew you needed when it came to your free leisure time, which is something you can't get back, right? You don't want to get that family trip wrong or that anniversary trip wrong and be the place that TripAdvisor said was good just because it was good for the guy down the street. Like you want to go to the place that's great for you. And so the advisors are just incredibly well versed at customizing trips.
Yeah.
I use them myself now too, because I need help all the time with travel. So Jet Set World Travel is where you can find them. Where you can find me is just lindseyepperly.com is going to have all the links to Instagram and LinkedIn where I'm most active. We've got some cool resources. I talk a lot about imposter syndromes. We've got a resource on how to turn imposter syndrome into inspiration. And we've got all the links to the podcast. So that way, lindseyepperly.com is just the best place to find everything in one place.
Awesome. Lindsey, thank you so much. This was fun. I'm grateful for you, grateful for years of friendship and being able to just parallel your journey and just see all that you've done. And you're just such an inspiration. So thanks for joining us today.
Jenny, I feel the same way. Thank you so much for having me.